A retired Navy SEAL stopped for one night, and a wounded dog chose his car. The dog didn't want food, comfort, or rescue. It kept pulling him back to a frozen place everyone had abandoned. No body, no villain, no secret treasure, just proof that someone had left too soon. Grant had spent years walking away when the mission ended, but this dog forced him to face one question. What if leaving is the wound? Where are you watching from? Stay to the end, share your thoughts, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers by liking and subscribing. The road had already disappeared once. Grant noticed it in the way the headlights stopped reflecting anything solid. No painted lines, no edge markers, just a flat white surface that swallowed distance. Snow didn't fall so much as drift sideways, pushed by wind that never seemed to settle into a direction. He slowed, not out of caution, but habit. There were movements he no longer thought about, the way his fingers adjusted on the wheel, the way his eyes shifted between the road, the mirrors, and the empty dark beyond the glass. Even now, 6 months removed from the teams, his body still worked like something waiting for instruction. The instruction just never came anymore. The shuttle van hummed beneath him, steady but tired. It wasn't his. Nothing in it was. He drove routes people handed him, airport pickups, long hauls between towns, late-night runs no one else wanted. It paid enough. It filled hours. It didn't ask questions. A flicker of light broke through the storm ahead, yellow, dim, barely holding its ground against the weather. Grant eased the van toward it. The gas station looked like it had been standing there longer than it should have. One pump worked, the other leaned slightly to one side, frozen in place. A narrow office sat behind it, windows fogged from the inside, a weak fluorescent glow buzzing behind the glass. He pulled in, engine idling. For a moment, he didn't move. The snow ticked softly against the windshield. Somewhere in the distance, wind moved through metal, loose siding maybe, or an old sign. Grant tapped the steering wheel twice with his fingers, a quiet, unconscious rhythm, then he stepped out. The cold hit fast, sharp enough to pull breath from his chest. His boots pressed into packed snow, the sound dull and compact. He rolled his shoulders once under the layers, camouflage worn soft from use, the red and black coat over it shifting slightly as he moved. Inside, the station smelled like old coffee and something faintly metallic. The woman behind the counter didn't look up right away. She was wiping her hands on a faded apron, the motion slow, deliberate, as if finishing it mattered more than whatever had just walked through the door. When she did look up, her eyes were clear, not surprised, just aware. "You're late for this stretch," she said. Grant stepped toward the counter, setting his gloves down. Weather slowed it. Her gaze flicked past him, toward the door, then back again. "It usually does." She wasn't asking anything else, not where he was headed, not how far. People out here rarely did. Grant nodded once. "Fuel." She moved without comment, reaching for the register. Her name tag read Lydia, the letters worn thin at the edges. There was a steadiness to her. Not warmth, not distance, just someone who had stood in the same place long enough to stop reacting to things. While she rang it up, Grant glanced around, shelves half-stocked, a rack of maps that looked untouched, a coffee machine that hummed louder than it worked, nothing out of place, except... Lydia followed his gaze before he said anything. "It's been around," she said, almost as if answering a question he hadn't asked. Grant looked back at her. "What has?" She tilted her head toward the door. "Dog." He didn't react immediately. "Whose?" She gave a small shrug. "Doesn't belong to anyone who's come through here." Grant picked up his gloves again. "Stray, then." "Maybe." The way she said it didn't settle anything. Grant stepped back outside. The wind had picked up. Snow moved in tighter sheets now, cutting across the lot in fast, low bursts. He walked to the pump, started fueling, and stood there with his hands tucked into his coat. That was when he saw it. At first, just movement, low to the ground, off to the side of the building where the light didn't quite reach. It stayed there, half-shadowed, not coming closer, not running off either. Grant didn't call out. He just watched. A German shepherd, young, not fully grown. Its coat was dark along the back, uneven in places, the brown underneath catching what little light spilled across the snow. One ear stood upright, the other dipped slightly at the tip. It shifted its weight. There was something off in the way it moved, subtle, but there. A hitch in the front leg. Not enough to slow it completely, just enough to notice. It didn't approach, didn't beg, didn't do anything really except stand there and look. Grant turned back to the pump. The numbers climbed steadily. Routine again. When he finished, he replaced the nozzle, wiped his hands once against his coat, and walked toward the driver's side door. The dog was still there. Closer now. Not by much. A few steps, maybe. Enough to leave clearer prints in the snow. Grant opened the door, paused. The dog didn't move. Wind pushed against the side of the van, a hollow thud of air against metal. Grant climbed in, shut the door, and started the engine. For a second, that was it. Just the hum of the vehicle and the storm pressing in from all sides. He reached for the gear. And something shifted outside. A quick movement. Not frantic, not aggressive, just decisive. The passenger door handle clicked. Grant's head turned, but not fast. Never fast. He had learned a long time ago that speed came after understanding, not before. The door opened just enough. A shape slipped through this gap, wet fur brushing against the seat as it climbed in with an awkward, unbalanced motion. Then it stopped. Sat. The door drifted closed behind it with a muted thud. For a moment, neither of them moved. The dog's breathing was steady but heavy. Its fur clung damp against its body, small flecks of ice melting into the fabric of the seat. Up close, the limp was more visible, not severe but recent. Grant didn't reach for it, didn't speak. He looked at it the same way he looked at everything else, through reflection first. The side mirror caught part of its face, the shape of its eyes, the way it wasn't scanning, wasn't searching. It was just there. Present. Waiting, maybe. Or not. Grant's hand hovered near the center console, not quite moving forward. "You're in the wrong place," he said finally. His voice came out low, even, not a command, not an invitation. The dog didn't respond. It didn't shrink back either. Instead, it shifted slightly, adjusting its weight so the injured leg took less pressure. A small, controlled movement. Practiced. Grant watched that. Something about it didn't match what he expected. Strays reacted. They flinched. They tested space. This one didn't. A gust of wind rocked the van slightly. Snow streaked across the windshield again, thicker now, harder to see through. Grant looked ahead, then back at the dog, then at the road, barely visible beyond the glass. He exhaled once, slow. "This isn't happening," he muttered, more to himself than anything else. His hand moved toward the passenger door. Stopped. The dog didn't lean away, didn't brace. It just stayed where it was, eyes not locked on him, not avoiding him either. Somewhere in between, neutral. Grant frowned slightly. That wasn't fear, and it wasn't trust. It was something else, something that didn't push back. His fingers curled, then relaxed. Outside, the storm tightened its grip, the kind of weather that didn't leave room for mistakes, the kind that closed roads without warning, buried things without asking. Grant tapped the steering wheel once, then again. A beat of silence stretched between him and the animal beside him. "Just to the next stop," he said. The words settled in the space without weight, like they weren't meant to last. He shifted the van into gear. The engine pulled forward, tires crunching over packed snow as the station lights faded behind them. The dog didn't move, didn't look back. It simply adjusted once more against the seat, lowering its head slightly, as if conserving what little energy it had left. Grant kept his eyes on the road, didn't reach over, didn't acknowledge it again. But he didn't stop the car either. And out in the storm, where everything else had already been erased, that small decision was the only thing that held. The road came back in pieces, not all at once, just enough to remind Grant where he was supposed to be. Faded lines appeared beneath the snow in broken stretches. Reflective markers caught the headlights for a second, then vanished again under drifting white. He kept the van steady, didn't look at the dog. It sat where it had been when he pulled away from the station, angled slightly toward the window. Its breathing had slowed, not from comfort, but from something more controlled, like it had decided how much energy it could afford to spend. Grant adjusted the heat up a notch. Not for himself. He drove another 20 minutes before the first sign of life appeared. A truck stop just off the highway, lights harsher than the station he'd left behind, casting sharp edges into the snow instead of soft shadows. 2 pickup trucks idled near the entrance. A long-haul rig stood further out, engine rumbling low, like it had been running for hours. Grant pulled in. He didn't turn off the engine this time. A man stepped out from the diner entrance as Grant parked. Broad shoulders, heavy coat, boots worn down unevenly at the heels. He moved like someone used to uneven ground, weight shifting naturally, not carefully. The man opened the back door without asking. "Still running north?" he said, settling in. Grant nodded once. "As far as the pass. Good enough?" The man shut the door behind him, then paused. There was a subtle shift in the air, not silence, something tighter than that. Grant saw it in the mirror, the way the man's posture changed just slightly, like something didn't line up with expectation. "What's that?" the man asked. Grant didn't answer right away. The dog hadn't moved. It didn't turn toward the voice, didn't react the way most animals would when a stranger entered their space. "It got in," Grant said finally. "That's so." The man leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. His gaze settled on the dog, not cautious, not aggressive, just measuring. For a second, nothing happened. Then the dog shifted, not toward him, not away, just enough to reposition its front leg, easing pressure off it again. The man caught that immediately. "Not a stray," he said. Grant's grip on the wheel tightened just slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Look at how it holds itself." Grant didn't respond. The man continued anyway. "Strays don't sit like that. They either bolt or beg. This one's doing neither." Grant glanced in the mirror again. The dog's ears flicked once, not toward the man, but toward something outside. A truck engine revved in the distance, louder now as it pulled out onto the road. The dog's head turned slightly, not alarmed, focused. The man followed the movement, then leaned back slowly. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's trained." Grant pulled out of the lot without another word. The road climbed gradually now, curving through darker stretches where the trees pressed closer. Snow clung to branches, heavy and uneven, sagging under its own weight. Inside the van, the air shifted with each turn. The man in the back settled into silence, but not the kind that relaxed. His eyes stayed forward, occasionally flicking to the side where the dog sat. After a few miles, he spoke again. "Military." Grant didn't answer. The question wasn't aimed at him. It hung there anyway. The man scratched at his beard, then gave a short breath through his nose. "Figures." The dog didn't react. Not to the word, not to the tone. Grant noticed that, filed it away without meaning to. Another bend in the road, another stretch of darkness. The truck from earlier passed them going the opposite direction, headlights cutting across the interior for a split second. In that flash, Grant saw it clearly. The dog's eyes weren't tracking movement the way they should have. They weren't following the light. They were fixed, somewhere just beyond it. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. Then it was gone. The light disappeared. The road returned. Grant exhaled slowly. "You dropped me at the junction," the man said after a while. Grant nodded. The rest of the drive passed without conversation. When they reached the turnoff, the man gathered his things, but didn't step out immediately. His hand rested on the door handle, then paused. "You planning on keeping it?" he asked. "No." The answer came faster than Grant expected. The man nodded once, like he'd heard what he needed to. "Then don't wait too long," he said. "Dogs like that don't end up nowhere by accident." He stepped out into the cold, shutting the door behind him with a solid click. Grant watched him go in the mirror. Then he drove on. The road flattened out after the pass. Wind eased. Snow thinned to a steady fall instead of a sideways assault. Grant checked the clock. Still time before the next scheduled pickup. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then tapped Lydia's number. It rang longer than expected. When she picked up, her voice sounded the same as before, steady, like she hadn't moved since he left. "You made it through," she said. "Barely." A pause. "You still got it with you?" she asked. Grant glanced sideways. The dog hadn't changed position much. It had lowered its head slightly, resting just above its front paws, but its eyes were still open. "Yeah." Another pause, longer this time. "I've seen it before," Lydia said. Grant leaned back slightly in his seat. "You said that." "I didn't say where." He waited. On the other end, he could hear something faint. Wind against the building, maybe, or the hum of a refrigerator unit. "Used to show up near the old industrial yard," she said. "Couple miles off the main road, back when the storm hit last year." Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. Storm? Took out half that area, flooded it first, then froze over. They set up a temporary rescue point out there. Volunteers, trucks, the whole thing. Grant said nothing. The dog started showing up after that, she continued. Not every day, just around. And no one claimed it. No one stayed long enough to. That settled differently. Grant looked ahead at the road, then back at the dog. It hadn't reacted to the conversation, not outwardly, but its breathing had shifted again, slightly deeper now, more alert. You think it came from there, Grant said. I think it learned something there, Lydia replied. Same as everything else that passes through a place like that. Grant didn't answer. His fingers tapped once against the steering wheel, then stopped. You heading that way? She asked. No. The word came out flat. Certain. Another pause. All right, Lydia said. She didn't push, didn't suggest anything else. Drive safe, she added, then hung up. The van rolled on. Miles passed. The world narrowed to road, snow, and the low hum of the engine again. Grant adjusted his grip on the wheel. Then, without thinking, he reached into the small storage compartment near the dash, pulled out a wrapped protein bar. He held it for a second, looked at it, then unwrapped it halfway and set it on the console between them. He didn't offer it, didn't look over, just left it there. The dog didn't move, not immediately. A minute passed. 2. Grant kept his eyes forward. Another curve in the road, a dip, then a shift, soft, controlled. The dog leaned forward, nose hovering just above the bar. It didn't grab it, didn't snap. It waited. Grant's hand tightened slightly on the wheel. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge it. The dog took the food slowly, carefully, as if it had been taught not to waste it, not to rush, not to trust it completely either. Grant watched that from the corner of his eye. Something about it didn't sit right. Not wrong, just out of place. Yeah, he muttered under his breath. You don't belong out here. The dog didn't respond, didn't look at him. It simply settled back into its position, chewing slowly, then lowering its head again once it was done. Grant drove on, didn't turn the radio on, didn't call anyone else. The road stretched ahead, quieter now, emptier than before. And for the first time since the dog had gotten in, the silence between them didn't feel accidental. It felt held. By the time Grant pulled back into the small cluster of buildings that passed for a town, the storm had loosened its grip, but only slightly. Snow still fell, slower now, heavier, settling instead of striking. The roads were clearer, but not clean. Tire tracks cut through layers of compacted ice, uneven and unreliable. He turned into the motel lot without thinking about it. The sign flickered once above the office, vacancy glowing in weak red against the dark, the same kind of place that stayed open because it had nowhere else to go. Grant parked along the side, engine idling for a few seconds longer than necessary before he shut it off. Silence didn't come all at once. It settled in pieces, the ticking of the cooling engine, the faint hiss of wind along the building, the quiet pressure of snow against the roof. He reached for the keys, paused. The dog hadn't moved much since the last stretch of road. It still sat angled toward the passenger window, head slightly lowered, as if conserving more than just energy. Grant opened the door. Cold air slipped in, sharper now without the movement of the van to cut through it. He stepped out, didn't look back, not until he reached the front of the vehicle. The dog hadn't followed. It remained in the seat, watching. Not him, not the door, but the space beyond it. The parking lot, the edges of the building, the dark between the lights. Grant exhaled once. Suit yourself, he muttered. He walked around, opened the passenger door, and stepped aside. The dog didn't jump immediately. It lowered its front paw first, testing the ground before shifting its weight forward. The slight limp showed again, controlled, deliberate, like it had learned how to move around it. Then it stepped down. No hesitation, no lingering, just movement. Grant closed the door behind it and headed toward the office. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying the faint smell of cleaning solution and something older beneath it, carpet that had absorbed too many winters. Lydia stood behind the counter again, exactly where she had been hours earlier. Same posture, same measured stillness. You made it back, she said. Grant nodded. Road cleared enough? Her eyes flicked toward the door behind him. Still with you?" "Yeah." She didn't ask why, didn't ask what he planned to do. Instead, she reached for a key without looking down, sliding it across the counter. "Room 7. Heat works if you give it time." Grant took the key. "Appreciate it." He hesitated, then added, "You got a number for animal control?" Lydia leaned back slightly, folding her arms. "Not this late," she said. "Closest shelter's about 40 minutes south. Roads aren't clean enough for that right now." Grant's jaw shifted. He already knew that. "Morning, then," she added. "Morning," he repeated. It sounded like a decision, even though it wasn't one yet. Room 7 was narrow, the kind that made everything feel closer than it needed to be. A single bed, a small table, a heater mounted beneath the window that rattled more than it warmed. Grant set his keys down, shrugged off the outer coat, and stood there for a second, letting the quiet settle around him. The dog entered without waiting. It moved through the room slowly, not sniffing everything, not circling, just passing through, taking in space without claiming it. Grant watched that. "Not curious," he said under his breath. The dog stopped near the door, sat, facing it. Grant frowned slightly. "Door's closed," he said. The dog didn't move, didn't turn. It just stayed there, posture steady, attention fixed on something beyond the wood and metal. Grant shook his head once and moved past it. He unwrapped the remaining food from earlier, placed it on the table. Didn't offer it this time. The dog didn't come over, didn't even look. Grant leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed loosely. "You're not making this easy," he muttered. No response. Of course. He pushed off, stepped into the bathroom, ran the water just long enough to rinse his hands. The pipes groaned in protest, then settled into a weak, uneven flow. When he came back out, nothing had changed. The dog still faced the door. Still. Alert, not tense, just waiting. Grant sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, hands resting on his knees. He followed the dog's line of sight. There was nothing there, just a door, just a hallway beyond it, and whatever sound the building carried through thin walls, wind, maybe footsteps from another room. Or nothing at all. Grant leaned forward slightly, listened. At first he heard what he expected, low mechanical hum, distant movement in the pipes, the faint scrape of something outside. Then, a shift. Not loud, not clear, just enough to register as something that didn't belong to the usual pattern. The dog's ears twitched. Grant's jaw tightened. He stood, walked to the door, opened it. The hallway was empty. Light flickered once at the far end, casting uneven shadows along the walls. No movement, no sound beyond the same distant wind pressing against the building. Grant stepped out, looked left, right, nothing. He stood there longer than necessary, scanning corners, door frames, the edges where light didn't fully reach. His body knew what to do with uncertainty. His mind didn't. After a moment, he stepped back inside and closed the door. The dog hadn't moved. It simply shifted its weight slightly, as if adjusting to a new conclusion. Grant let out a short breath. "There's nothing there," he said. The dog didn't argue, didn't relax either. It just turned its head slightly, away from the door this time, and settled down, lowering itself to the floor. But it didn't sleep. Grant could tell. The stillness was wrong for that. Time passed without shape. Grant lay back on the bed, one arm resting across his chest, the other hanging loosely off the side. He closed his eyes, opened them again. The ceiling offered nothing. No distraction, no movement, just the same dull texture of a place meant for passing through. The heater kicked in with a sharp rattle, then off again. He shifted, rolling onto his side. The dog was still there. Same position, same alertness. "You planning on doing that all night?" Grant asked. No answer. He exhaled slowly, turned onto his back again, closed his eyes. The first sound didn't wake him. It pulled him up from something just beneath waking. A soft scrape, not loud enough to startle, just enough to interrupt. Grant's eyes opened. Darkness filled the room, broken only by the faint light bleeding through the curtains. He didn't move right away. Listened. The dog was already up, not barking, not pacing, standing, its silhouette cut across the dim light, angled toward the door again. Grant pushed himself up slowly, feet finding the floor without sound. "There's nothing there," he said again, quieter this time. The dog shifted, not away, toward him, just enough to make contact, shoulder brushing against his leg. Then it moved past him, stopped at the door, and this time, it didn't wait. It scratched once, firm, deliberate. Grant stared at it. Something tightened behind his ribs, not fear, recognition, the kind that came from too many nights where instinct had been the only thing left when everything else failed. He stood there, unmoving, watching the door, waiting for something to justify the reaction. Nothing came. No footsteps, no voices, no sound beyond the building settling under the weight of snow. The dog scratched again. Once, then stopped. Grant ran a hand across his face, exhaling through his nose. "This is exactly the kind of thing that gets people hurt," he muttered. He reached for the handle, stopped. His grip tightened. He remembered a night, different place, different time, when a wrong read had almost cost more than he was willing to admit. Instinct wasn't always right. Sometimes it just felt right, and that was worse. He let go of the handle. The dog went still, not confused, not frustrated, just still. Grant stepped back. "That's it," he said, more firmly now. "Morning." The word settled into the room like a boundary, a line drawn. The dog didn't push it. It lowered itself back to the floor, though its head remained up, eyes still open. Grant returned to the bed, this time pulling the blanket over himself without thinking. He stared at the ceiling again. Longer this time. His thoughts didn't settle. They circled. Around the door, around the sound that might not have been anything, around the way the dog had moved, not randomly, not urgently, but with a kind of certainty that didn't match the situation. He exhaled slowly, turned onto his side, closed his eyes. Sleep came in fragments, not enough to rest, just enough to pass time. When morning finally pushed through the thin curtains, it did so quietly. No storm, no wind, just light. Grant sat up before the alarm on his phone had a chance to go off. The room felt smaller in daylight, more ordinary. The dog lay where it had been, though its eyes opened the moment Grant moved. Not groggy, not slow, just aware. Grant swung his legs off the bed, reached for his boots. He didn't look at the door, didn't check it, didn't mention the night. "Shelter," he said, tying the laces. The word sounded different now, less like a plan, more like something that needed to be done before it became something else. He stood, grabbed his coat, and moved toward the door. The dog rose without hesitation. This time it followed. Morning didn't feel like a reset. It felt like something that had waited. The sky had cleared just enough to let light through, but the ground still held everything from the night before. Snow layered over older tracks, softening edges, erasing direction. Grant drove without turning the radio on. The road south was quieter than he expected. No early traffic, no maintenance trucks, just long stretches of open asphalt cutting through white terrain. The dog sat differently now, not as still, not as withdrawn. It wasn't restless either, just present in a way it hadn't been the night before. Its head lifted more often, its ears shifted with passing sounds, even when those sounds came from far off. Grant noticed, didn't comment. The sign for the shelter came up ahead, small and partially covered in snow. Another few miles and he'd be there. Clean solution, simple end to something that had stretched longer than it should have. He eased off the gas slightly. The road curved left. A narrow access road broke off to the right, barely visible beneath the snow. Grant didn't turn. He kept going. The dog shifted, not suddenly, not urgently, just enough to break the rhythm. Grant's eyes flicked sideways, then forward again. The shelter sign passed, disappeared behind him. He kept driving. The dog stood. That alone was new. It didn't bark, didn't whine. It stepped closer to the door, its weight uneven on the injured leg but steady enough to hold. Grant's grip tightened slightly on the wheel. "Sit," he said. The word came out automatic. The dog didn't obey, didn't resist either. It just remained where it was, attention fixed, not on him, but somewhere outside the van. Grant exhaled through his nose. "You're not making decisions here." The road straightened. Another 100 yards. Then Grant slowed. Not because of the dog, because something in the distance didn't line up. Off to the right, beyond a stretch of broken fencing, structures rose out of the snow. Low buildings, metal siding, dark windows, the kind of place that used to hold activity and didn't anymore. The access road curved toward it, barely used, half covered. Grant didn't turn, not immediately. He drove past it. 10 seconds, 20. The van moved forward, the shelter now behind him, the road ahead clear. The dog didn't sit down. It stayed standing, facing the direction they had just passed. Grant tapped the steering wheel once, then again. The motion didn't settle anything. He checked the mirror. Empty road behind him, no traffic, no reason not to turn around. Except he didn't need one. Damn it, he muttered. He slowed, then pulled the van into a wide enough patch to make a careful turn. The tires shifted slightly on packed snow before catching again. He angled back toward the access road. Didn't look at the dog, didn't say anything. The closer they got, the quieter it became. Not the kind of quiet that came from distance, the kind that came from absence. No engine noise, no machinery, no signs of anything recently disturbed. Grant pulled up just outside the broken fence and stopped. The engine idled for a moment. Then he shut it off. Silence settled again, this time heavier. He opened his door, stepped out. The cold felt different here, still sharp but held, like the wind didn't pass through, just sat in place. He moved toward the passenger side. Before he could reach for the handle, it opened. The dog jumped down, faster than before. Cleaner movement, despite the limp. It didn't wait, didn't look back. It crossed through the gap in the fence and into the open yard. Grant followed, not rushed, but not slow either. The snow here was uneven, broken in places where older tracks had been half buried. He could see where vehicles had once moved in and out, leaving grooves now filled with ice. The building stood in a loose cluster, metal walls dented in places, a loading dock partially collapsed on one side. A chain link section bent outward as if something had pushed through it and never been repaired. Grant scanned the area automatically. Corners, entrances, sightlines, no movement, no sound, just space. The dog moved ahead, weaving through patches of snow and debris, its path not random, but not direct either. It slowed near a stack of crates, stopped, lowered its head, sniffed, then moved on. Grant watched that carefully. "You've been here," he said under his breath. The dog didn't react. It continued forward until it reached a section of ground where the snow lay thinner, uneven as if something beneath it disrupted the surface. It stopped there, stood still. Then slowly it pawed at the snow, not digging aggressively, not searching, just clearing. Grant stepped closer. Something dark showed beneath the surface. Fabric. He crouched, brushing more snow away with his hand. A high-visibility jacket. Orange, faded, half-buried, one sleeve twisted unnaturally beneath the weight of ice. Grant didn't touch it further. He stood again, scanning outward. Nearby, a plastic container lay on its side, cracked open. Inside, smaller supplies, gauze, tape, scattered and frozen in place. A metal pole leaned against the side of the building, its base still tied to a length of rope. Not rope, chain, partially unfastened. Grant's gaze lingered there. Something in his chest shifted, not sharp, not sudden, just alignment, pieces settling into a shape that didn't need explanation anymore. Behind him, snow crunched. Grant turned. A man stood near the edge of the yard, just inside the broken fence. Tall, lean in a way that came from years of work, not age alone. His jacket was thick, brown, worn at the seams. Gloves tucked into one pocket. His posture slightly uneven, as if one shoulder carried more weight than the other. He didn't look surprised to see Grant, or the dog. "Didn't expect anyone out here this morning," the man said. His voice was steady, not guarded. Grant straightened. "Road's open," he replied. The man nodded once, as if that explained enough. His eyes moved to the dog, stayed there longer. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That tracks." Grant didn't respond. The man stepped closer, boots pressing deep into the snow. "Harlan," he said, extending a hand. Grant hesitated for a fraction of a second, then took it. "Grant." Harlan's grip was firm but brief. He looked past Grant toward the jacket, the scattered supplies, the chain, then back to the dog. "It brought you here," he said. Grant glanced down at the animal. It had stopped moving, not searching anymore, just standing, facing the space. "I followed," Grant said. Harlan gave a slight nod. "Same difference sometimes." Grant's jaw shifted slightly. "What is this place?" he asked. Harlan exhaled slowly, eyes drifting across the yard. "Used to be a staging point," he said. "After the storm last year, flood hit first, then everything froze before they could clear it." Grant looked around again. "You were here." Yeah. No hesitation. No one stayed long, Harlan continued. Once the roads opened, they packed up fast, moved what they could. Grant's eyes moved back to the chain. Not everything. Harlan followed his gaze. A pause settled between them. Then he nodded. Not everything. The dog let out a low breath. Not a whine, not a call, just something released. Grant looked down at it. It wasn't searching anymore. It wasn't waiting either. It had stopped. And for the first time since it had entered his van, it didn't seem like it was trying to go anywhere. Grant straightened slowly. His eyes moved across the yard one more time. The jacket, the supplies, the chain, nothing hidden, nothing revealed, just things left where they had fallen, and no one who had come back for them. The wind didn't return. That was the first thing Grant noticed after a while. The place stayed quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It had shape now, edges, a sense that it belonged to something that had once been active, not something naturally still. Harlan moved slowly through the yard, not as someone inspecting, but as someone revisiting. He didn't step around the debris. He stepped through it, boots pressing into snow where tracks had long since disappeared, stopping occasionally, not to look closer, but to remember where something used to be. Grant watched him, didn't interrupt. The dog stayed near the patch of disturbed snow where it had uncovered the jacket. It didn't dig again, didn't search, just remained there, as if the act of uncovering had been enough. Harlan crouched near the cracked supply container, brushing frost from the edge with his glove. Funny thing about places like this, he said without looking up. They don't feel abandoned at first. Grant shifted his weight slightly. What do they feel like? Temporary. Harlan stood again, turning slowly to take in the surrounding structures. Like someone just stepped away for a minute. Like things are still in motion. You just caught them in between. Grant followed his gaze. Nothing moved. Nothing suggested motion, and yet it didn't feel settled. Harlan walked a few steps toward the loading dock, then stopped short of climbing up. They brought in animals too, he said. Not just people. Whatever got caught out there in the storm, strays, farm dogs, a couple of working dogs from the outer towns. Grant's eyes moved to the dog again. It hadn't reacted. Not to the words, not to the tone. It simply stood where it had been, attention lowered now, no longer scanning. Harlan noticed that. Yeah, he said quietly. That fits. Grant crossed his arms loosely. You knew about it, he said. Not a question. Harlan didn't deny it. I was part of it, he said. Short-term crew. Brought in to help clear, stabilize, move people out before the freeze hit. Grant nodded once. That matched what Lydia had said. Things got messy toward the end, Harlan continued. Roads started opening faster than expected. Supplies ran thin. People got reassigned. It turned into a rotation instead of a station. He gestured vaguely toward the buildings. Hard to hold something together when nobody's staying in one place long enough to be responsible for it. Grant's jaw shifted slightly. Someone was responsible, he said. Harlan looked at him, held the gaze for a moment. Yeah, he said. Someone always is. The answer didn't land clean. It settled somewhere between agreement and deflection. Grant let it sit. A stretch of quiet followed. Not empty. Just waiting for something else to fill it. Harlan turned away first, stepping toward the edge of the yard where the fence dipped lower into the snow. There was a dog, he said after a while. Grant didn't move, didn't react. He didn't need to. Harlan exhaled slowly. Came in with one of the transport teams, not official, just stuck with them. Good instincts, didn't spook easy, knew how to stay out of the way. Grant glanced down at the dog again. Its posture hadn't changed, but something about the stillness felt different now, less like waiting, more like listening. Harlan continued. Didn't belong to anyone, not exactly. One of those dogs that ends up attached to a job instead of a person. Grant understood that. More than he wanted to. What happened to it? He asked. Harlan didn't answer right away. He bent down near a section of chain half buried in the snow, lifting it slightly before letting it fall back into place. What happens to most things when people start leaving faster than they arrived? He said. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not an answer. Harlan straightened, brushing his hands together. No, he said. It's not. Another pause. Then, I thought about taking it, Harlan said. The words came quieter this time, less like a statement, more like something he hadn't said out loud before. Grant shifted his stance. What stopped you? Harlan looked out across the yard, not at Grant. Same thing that stops most people from doing something that sounds right at the time. Grant waited. Harlan's mouth tightened slightly before he spoke again. I knew I wouldn't stay. The wind picked up just enough to move loose snow along the ground, not enough to change the quiet. Job like that, Harlan continued. You move where they need you. You don't settle. You don't anchor. He gestured vaguely, searching for the right word. You don't promise anything you can't keep. Grant's shoulders shifted slightly beneath his coat. That's one way to look at it. Harlan let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. It's the honest way. Grant didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because something in that answer had already started to settle deeper than he expected. The dog moved. Just a step. Then another. Not toward either of them, toward the edge of the yard, where the snow thinned and the ground beneath showed through in uneven patches. It stopped there. Stood still. Not searching. Not returning. Just holding the space. Grant watched that, and for the first time he didn't see direction in it. He saw repetition, the same action over and over again, not because it led somewhere, but because it had once mattered, because it hadn't been finished. Harlan followed his gaze. It used to sit out there, he said, near the fence, after everything started breaking down. Grant's throat tightened slightly. Waiting? He asked. Harlan shook his head. Not exactly. He took a step closer, boots crunching softly. More like staying. The distinction landed harder than it should have. Grant looked down at his hands, flexed them once, then still. I figured it would wander off eventually, Harlan added. Find a place that made more sense. Grant didn't look up. And it didn't. Harlan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Grant turned slowly, taking in the yard again, the jacket, the scattered supplies, the chain. None of it was dramatic. None of it pointed to anything hidden or unresolved in a way that demanded action. It just existed, left behind, incomplete. He exhaled slowly. You ever come back? He asked. Harlan shrugged lightly. A couple times. And? Harlan's eyes drifted toward the dog again. Didn't change anything. Grant nodded. That felt true. Too true. The dog lowered itself to the ground. Not in rest. Not in exhaustion. Just lowering, settling into the space it had returned to. Grant watched it for a long moment, then looked away. Something pressed at the edge of his thoughts. Not memory, not exactly. Just fragments. Moments where he had walked away from things because that was the job, because staying wasn't part of it, because there was always another place, another assignment, another reason to keep moving. He had never questioned that, not then, and not since. Until now. He shifted his stance again, eyes scanning the yard without really seeing it. You did what you thought made sense, he said. Harlan nodded. Yeah, Grant looked at him. That doesn't mean it was right. Harlan held his gaze. For a second, something like agreement passed between them. Then it was gone. Doesn't mean it was wrong either, Harlan said. Grant didn't argue, because that was the problem. There wasn't a clean line between the two. The dog let out a low breath, not directed at either of them, not signaling anything, just there. Grant looked down again. It wasn't waiting. It wasn't searching. It had come back and stayed. Not because it expected something, because something here had never been finished. Grant swallowed once, slow. His eyes moved across the yard one last time, then back to the dog. He didn't call it, didn't move toward it, but something in his posture shifted anyway, subtle, barely noticeable, but enough. The road back felt shorter. Not because it was, because Grant didn't look at anything the same way anymore. He drove without slowing near the access road this time. The turnoff passed by in his peripheral vision, just another break in the snow-lined stretch of asphalt. Echo didn't react. It sat where it had been since they left the yard, posture neutral, gaze unfixed, not watching, not waiting. Grant noticed that too. It wasn't pulling him anymore, which somehow made it worse. The shelter came into view just before noon. Low buildings, practical and clean, in a way that suggested constant use. Fences lined the outer edge, layered with snow but intact. A sign near the entrance read, County Animal Services, letters clear against the white. Grant pulled in, turned off the engine, sat for a moment. He didn't hesitate like before, didn't second guess. He opened the door and stepped out. The cold had softened since morning, but the air still carried that thin bite that settled into joints more than skin. Echo jumped down on its own, no limp this time, or maybe it had adjusted enough that it didn't show. Grant didn't check. He started toward the entrance. Echo followed. Inside, the shelter smelled like antiseptic and damp fabric, not unpleasant, just contained. A woman stood behind the front desk, sleeves rolled to her elbows despite the temperature outside. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands slipping free near her temples. There was a tiredness in her eyes that didn't come from lack of sleep. It came from repetition. She looked up when Grant entered. Then her gaze dropped to the dog. She didn't smile, didn't react the way most people did when they saw a German shepherd walk in. Instead, she studied it. "How long have you had him?" she asked. Grant shrugged slightly. "Less than a day." The woman stepped around the desk, moving slowly, not approaching directly. She kept a slight angle, giving the dog space without making a point of it. "Stray?" she asked. "Got in the car." That was enough explanation. She crouched a few feet away, watching. Echo didn't move toward her, didn't pull back. It just stood there, weight balanced, attention low. The woman nodded once, almost to herself. "Yeah," she said quietly. Grant frowned slightly. "What?" She stood up again, brushing her hands against her pants. "He's not a stray," she said. "Not in the way people usually mean it." Grant crossed his arms. "He's not wearing a collar." "That doesn't matter." She stepped closer now, slower this time. Echo didn't react. The woman glanced at Grant. "You mind?" Grant didn't answer, didn't need to. She extended her hand, not to touch but to let the dog register it. Echo leaned forward slightly, sniffed once, then pulled back on its own. The woman nodded again. "Working dog," she said. Or was. Grant's jaw shifted. "You're sure?" She gave him a look. "I've seen enough of them to know the difference." Grant looked down at Echo, then back at her. "Can you take him?" The question came out flat. Functional. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped past them toward a hallway leading deeper into the building. "Come on," she said. Grant followed. Echo stayed close. The kennels lined both sides of the hallway, some empty, some not. Dogs moved behind the gates, different sizes, different breeds, different reactions. Some barked immediately, some paced, some didn't react at all. Echo slowed. Not from fear, from awareness. It looked at each enclosure as they passed, not stopping, not engaging, just noticing. The woman opened an empty kennel door halfway down. "This would be temporary," she said. "We don't keep working dogs long if we can avoid it. They don't do well in here." Grant stepped forward. Echo didn't. It stopped just outside the threshold. The woman waited. Didn't coax. Didn't call. Grant looked back at the dog. "Go," he said. The word came out the same way it always had. Clear. Direct. Echo didn't move. Grant felt something tighten behind his ribs. "Go," he repeated. The dog shifted its weight, took a step forward, then stopped again, right at the line where concrete met the interior space of the kennel. Its head lowered slightly, not submissive, not resistant, just uncertain. The woman watched carefully, then shook her head. "He'll go in," she said, "but he won't stay." Grant's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means you can close that door, walk away, and technically, you've done the right thing." She met his gaze directly now. "But that doesn't mean it's going to work." Grant didn't respond. Echo stepped forward, slowly, one paw over the threshold, then another. It entered the kennel, turned once, sat. The woman reached for the door, paused, looked at Grant. "You sure?" she asked. Grant nodded once. The door closed. The sound wasn't loud, but it didn't feel small either. Echo didn't bark, didn't move toward the gate. It just stayed where it was, watching. Grant held its gaze for a second longer than he meant to. Then he turned, walked out. The air outside felt different, colder, sharper. Grant didn't go back to the van immediately. He stood near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed somewhere past the parking lot. A phone rang, not his. Inside, somewhere behind the walls. Then it stopped. He exhaled slowly, stepped toward the van. Halfway there, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. "Unknown number." He answered. "Hollowell." A voice on the other end, steady, professional, no small talk. "Got a run for you. Long haul. 2-day route, maybe 3 depending on weather. Pays double standard." Grant didn't respond right away. "Need confirmation within the hour," the voice continued. "We're short on drivers who can handle the pass this time of year." Grant glanced back at the building, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. "What's the route?" he asked. The voice listed it. Distances, stops, time frames. It lined up, clean, predictable, exactly the kind of job that kept things moving, kept things simple. "You in?" the voice asked. Grant's grip tightened slightly around the phone. "Call you back," he said. He ended the call before the other side could respond. He didn't get into the van, didn't start the engine. He just stood there, looking at nothing, thinking about something he couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't about the dog. Not exactly. It was about the pattern. The way things had always worked. You moved. You finished what you were assigned. You didn't stay longer than necessary. You didn't build anything that couldn't be packed up and left behind. It kept things clean. It kept things controlled. It kept things from getting complicated. Grant exhaled, looked back at the shelter again. This time, he noticed the small details. A shovel leaning against the wall, footprints near the entrance, partially filled with fresh snow, a metal bucket near the side door. Ordinary things, temporary things, the kind of things that stayed just long enough to serve a purpose, then got replaced. He turned, walked back to the van, opened the door, stopped, didn't get in. He stood there, one hand on the frame, eyes fixed on the ground. A minute passed, maybe more. Then he closed the door again, harder than necessary. The drive back to the industrial yard wasn't fast, not slow either, just direct. The road hadn't changed, the turnoff still barely visible, the snow still uneven. But something in the movement felt different, not pulled, not guided, chosen. When he reached the yard, he didn't shut the engine off right away. He sat there for a second, then killed it. The silence returned, same as before, but heavier now. He stepped out, closed the door, walked through the broken fence. The buildings stood exactly as they had been, unchanged, unmoved, and near the edge of the yard. The dog sat, same position, same orientation, as if the time in between hadn't happened. Grant stopped a few feet away, didn't call it, didn't approach. Echo turned its head slightly, not surprised, not relieved, just aware. Grant let out a slow breath. Something settled in him then, not comfort, not certainty, just an end to hesitation. For the first time in a long time, the next step wasn't about where he was supposed to go. It was about where he wasn't, and this time, he didn't turn away. The days didn't change all at once. They stretched out the same way the road used to, one into the next, without announcement, without clear edges. But the direction had shifted, even if the distance hadn't. Grant noticed it in the work first. The long routes stopped coming. Not because they weren't offered. His phone still lit up with numbers he didn't recognize, schedules that promised mileage, steady pay, movement. He let most of them go unanswered. The few he did respond to, he declined without explanation. Instead, he took the shorter runs, local pickups, supply deliveries between towns, the kind of work that started and ended within the same stretch of land, the kind that didn't require leaving anything behind. Echo adjusted before he did. At first, it still carried the same quiet tension in its body, the slight lean toward open space, the way its attention lingered too long on certain directions. It would sit in the van and watch intersections as if something might appear if it waited long enough. Grant didn't interrupt that, didn't redirect it, he didn't train it, didn't give commands unless he needed space or movement. Even then, the words were fewer than before. He let the dog figure out where it stood, and more importantly, where it didn't have to. A week passed. Then another. The industrial yard didn't disappear from their routine, but it changed. The first time Grant drove back there after that day, Echo had moved immediately, out of the van, across the broken fence, back to the same patch of uneven ground. Grant didn't follow right away. He stayed by the van, leaning against the door, watching. Echo didn't dig this time, didn't search. It just stood there. A minute passed, then two, then without prompting, it turned, walked back, not slowly, not reluctantly, just finished. Grant noticed that, didn't comment, but something in his posture eased. By the third visit, Echo didn't go straight to the spot anymore. It stepped out, paused, looked across the yard as if confirming something had stayed the same. Then it moved in a wider arc, circling the area once before returning to the van. The place hadn't changed, but the way it mattered had. Grant didn't try to define that. He just let it be. Lydia became part of the rhythm without either of them deciding it. Grant stopped by more often, not always for fuel, sometimes just to stand inside where it was warmer, where the hum of the building filled in the spaces that used to stretch too far. Lydia never asked why he came back. She didn't track time that way. If he showed up, she poured coffee. If Echo stepped inside, she set out the same metal bowl without looking. "You're not driving as far," she said one afternoon, wiping her hands against her apron. Grant leaned against the counter, nodding once. "No." "That temporary?" Grant thought about it, then shook his head. "Doesn't feel like it." Lydia studied him for a second, not questioning, just marking the change. "That's something," she said. Grant didn't respond, but he didn't leave right away either. Harlan appeared differently, not by coincidence, not by accident. Grant saw him again at the edge of town first, standing beside an old pickup truck with the hood open, tools laid out in the back like they'd been there long enough to forget being packed away. Harlan looked up when the van slowed. Recognition came without surprise. "You staying around?" he asked, closing the hood with a firm push. Grant stepped out of the van. "For now." Harlan nodded, as if that was enough. He glanced toward Echo, who stood near the front of the van, not approaching, not avoiding. Just there. "Looks different," Harlan said. Grant followed his gaze. Echo wasn't tense, wasn't fixed in place. It shifted its weight naturally, attention moving with the sounds of the town instead of locking onto a single point. "Yeah," Grant said. "It does." Harlan wiped his hands against a rag, folding it once before setting it down. "Funny thing," he said. "You don't fix something like that by forcing it to move on." Grant leaned back slightly against the side of the van. "No." Harlan met his eyes briefly. "You just give it somewhere else to stand." Grant didn't answer, but the words stayed. It happened quietly, so quietly that Grant almost missed it. One morning, early before the town had fully woken, he pulled over near the same stretch of open land where he'd stopped before. The snow had fallen overnight, light, steady, leaving a thin layer across everything without burying it. Echo stepped out of the van, walked a few paces forward, then stopped. Grant stayed where he was, one hand resting against the door. He didn't call, didn't gesture. Echo stood there longer than usual. Its posture wasn't searching, wasn't waiting. It just held the space. Then it turned, not toward the road behind them, not toward the direction of the industrial yard, toward him. It walked back, closed the distance without hesitation, and this time, when it reached his side, it didn't pause. It settled down immediately, lowering itself into the snow beside the van. Grant looked down. Something shifted in his chest, not sharp, not overwhelming, just clear. The kind of clarity that didn't need to be tested. The morning stretched slowly. Light filtered through low clouds, softening everything it touched. Grant didn't get back into the van, didn't reach for the keys. He stood there, watching the land the way he used to watch roads, measuring distance, anticipating movement. Except now, there was nothing to anticipate, nothing coming, nothing leaving. Echo's breathing was steady, even, no tension left in it, Grant shifted his weight once, adjusting against the cold, still didn't move. The engine stayed off longer than it should have, longer than it ever had, and for the first time that didn't feel like something waiting to happen. It felt like something that already had. Some things in life don't need to be fixed. They just need someone willing to stay. Not every unfinished moment asks for action. Sometimes it asks for presence, quiet, steady, without rushing to make it right. In a world that teaches us to keep moving, to chase the next thing, there is something powerful about choosing not to walk away, about standing beside what remains, even when it doesn't promise anything in return. Maybe that's where grace quietly lives, not in the big turning points, but in the small decision to stay when leaving would be easier. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome here. Wherever you are tonight, may you find the kind of peace that doesn't ask you to go anywhere else.